It may sound hyperbolic to say this, but I feel that humanity is trending towards a very dark and uncertain path at the moment. And I hope my viewers, however few, really consider the information I'll be putting down here. So you may see the title of the video and assume I'll be talking about climate change. Well, I will, but the issues of oil as an energy resource paired in a capitalistic system go far, far deeper than just climate change. No, I see this as a three-pronged issue that spans from economics to geopolitics to, of course, the climate and environment. So, without further ado, let's get started. This video will be separated into 3 chapters. Starting with Chapter 1, the illogical economics. To understand the full extent of how counterintuitive the economics of the oil trade are, we need to first understand what the point of having an economy is at all. I know that sounds silly, but trust me, the problems with oil as a commodity for trade apply to a host of other commodities that we take for granted. In my view, the point of having an economy is to have a self-actualizing system by which the resources of society are distributed within said society. It would be pretty impossible for any government to manage how much of the quote-unquote commonwealth each individual person has access to on such a micro-granular level. You know, Biden can't just tell me that I get 5 loaves of bread today and 6 loaves tomorrow and do that for all, of the millions of people in the US. And so that's why we have an economic system to make those decisions for us. And so capitalism is supposed to be the most fair economic system that's possible, quote unquote, ensuring that anyone can gain access to the Commonwealth by entering into the market as either a laborer or a firm. Of course, capitalism enthusiasts will never tell you the consequences of failure under such a system. Without government intervention, the so-called free market capitalism we have today would be a complete train wreck. Let's say we got rid of food stamps, unemployment, welfare, the whole lot of it. What would happen to someone who gets fired from their job at Walmart? They need that paycheck at the end of the week to feed themselves, and they don't really have savings because you can't really save money when you have a minimum wage job. And so a month unemployed, and you might actually just straight up die. And that's not an exaggeration. If you don't have, let's say, a family, maybe you got disowned or something, you're a loner, you don't have any friends, and you're unemployed for a month, without food stamps, you starve. But in the real world, we have those social assistance programs, so things aren't quite that dire. The point is, though, necessities for human life are seen as commodities for trade under capitalism. Things like food, water, shelter, healthcare, and energy. And without access to capital, you lose your access to these necessary resources. So, let's get around to talking about oil. It is the #1 source of energy worldwide. Without it, we wouldn't have even a fraction of the modern society we have today. And at this point, I would classify it as a necessity. After all, you need electricity, that's often used from energy plants that burn oil, to power your heating, your AC, and your refrigerator. And all of these things alone can be life or death. Look at what happened in Texas a few years ago. Massive winter storms took out the state's grid, and 270 people died as a result of not being able to heat up their homes. And so, the point of all of this context is to say that capitalism doesn't really distribute resources in a logical way. A logical society, one that's actually interested in the good of the commonwealth of the people, would put more effort into ensuring its citizens have access to the literal necessities of human life. Food, water, and shelter, and at this point, energy. But time and time again, it's the profits of these companies that are in charge of the resources that take first priority over everything else. And let me be clear, this is a deliberate choice made by the people in charge. and I feel that oil is a near perfect example of what I'm talking about. Even at its most basic level, the oil trade is illogical, and the United States is the perfect example of this. We are the #1 producers of oil in the entire world, but somehow we keep seeing our gas and energy prices skyrocket year after year. But the question is, if the supply is so high, then why in God's name is the price rising? Basic supply and demand economics should dictate that the price would go down under such a scenario. But the issue with oil, and other necessities for that matter, is that the demand is completely inelastic. People all over the world need oil for electricity and gasoline. You can't really choose to not fuel up your car. You can't really choose to not power your heating system. Now imagine you're an oil company and you have a large supply of American oil that you drilled in Alaska, say, and you're looking at your options here. Where do I export it? You know, I have all this oil, where do I sell it? And the demand, you see, is essentially equal in the US market as the overseas market, because in both markets, the demand is basically infinite. But if you export it overseas, you can charge more. You can mark it up to hell and back, and they can't do anything about it because they need it. So, naturally, you sell all of your oil overseas. But that's where the problem begins for us in the US. Now that the oil companies have drilled for all of our oil and then sold it off overseas, we're left with nothing. And in fact, we now have to import oil for use domestically, even though again, we're the #1 producers of oil. And so that's why we see our prices go up. But have you considered that that's dumb? Big stupid even. I mean, we literally have the most oil in the entire world. It's hard to even explain how illogical this all is, right? Any reasonable society would simply just use the oil they have for itself. But no, that makes too much sense. And that's the inherent issue with oil under a capitalist system. There is no incentive for the oil to be distributed locally. The only incentive is profit maximization, and so the companies sell their oil overseas. But I should note that other countries don't just let their oil companies do whatever they please. Now, Russia does let their oil companies do whatever, but a country like the monarchy of Saudi Arabia, for example, has a much larger hand in Aramco's dealings than the US does in any of its oil companies. The Saudi Arabian monarchy dictates that a certain percentage of Aramco's production be used domestically, and that's how they keep their prices reasonable for its own citizens. But the US, on the other hand, is completely dedicated to free market economics. That's like our mantra, our motto, our way of life. And so we just let ourselves get hoodwinked by oil companies over and over again. Of course, it's the American people getting hoodwinked, not the politicians. The folks in Washington are getting paid big time, and all they have to do is shut up and keep smiling. Inelastic demand isn't the only issue with the oil trade. It also suffers from inelastic supply. There are like 5 to 6, maybe 7 or 8 countries that control the vast majority of the global oil supply. And this includes the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, etc. And so this obviously leaves the supply of oil vulnerable for manipulation for political gain. The countries with the largest shares of the global supply can dictate how much oil they willingly withhold for the sake of inflating the price. And they do so with impunity. This is mainly seen with OPEC weaponizing the global oil supply for their own goals. And the potential for interference in the supply of oil, which is, again, a global necessity, has led to countless messy geopolitical situations. but I'll save those for later. The point is, the vast majority of the time that we see our oil prices rise, it has almost nothing to do with an actual scarcity crisis. Take, for example, the Ukraine-Russia war. People say that was the cause for our most recent rise in oil prices, especially here in the US. But that's actually just not true. Saudi Arabia, the opportunistic bastards they are, used the chaos of the war as cover to artificially reduce their own supply of oil. The Saudi monarchy even went as far as to collaborate with Russia, who were the perpetrators of the war, to decrease their supplies of oil. And so together they were able to skyrocket the global price of oil. And so as a result, us in the US of A suffered from sky-high gas and electricity prices in 2022 and 2023. And so, to bring it all back to where we started, we wouldn't have to deal with any of this if we just used our own damn supply of oil, for God's sakes. Gas would be so cheap, you'd see me driving a Ford F-150. And that's why the economics of the oil trade are completely illogical. It's a complete market failure on basically every level. But now that we've gone over the illogical economics, I can get into how those economic factors have contributed to geopolitical instability all over the world. The rabbit hole goes so deep with this one, it's hard to even comprehend, so stay tuned. If you liked this video, you can like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to stick around for part 2 of this series, which will be coming in the next couple days.